James Thompson adjusted his expensive black tie and looked round the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light on tables covered with white cloth and fresh flowers. Rich people in fancy clothes talked and laughed while holding glasses of champagne. But James felt completely alone in the crowded room. At 45 years old, James had everything money could buy. His technology company was worth millions of dollars. He owned 3 houses, 5 cars, and could travel anywhere in the world. But none of these things could fill the empty space in his heart that had been there since he was born. James had been abandoned as a tiny baby at London General Hospital. The nurses found him wrapped in a thin blanket with no note, no name, and no clue about who his parents were. The only thing that made him different from other babies was a small crescent-shaped birthmark on his left wrist. It looked like a tiny moon, pale against his skin. He grew up moving from one foster home to another. Some families were kind, others were not. Some kept him for months. Others sent him back after just a few weeks. James learned early that he could not depend on anyone but himself. He studied hard, worked harder, and built his business empire. But success could not heal the wound of never knowing where he came from or if he had any real family in the world. Tonight's charity dinner was supposed to raise money for orphan children. James came to these events because he felt he should help kids like he used to be, but they always made him sad, reminding him of his lonely childhood and the family he never had. The evening was almost over when volunteers from Sunshine Children's Home brought in a group of children. They were all dressed in their best clothes, their hair combed neatly, their faces shining with excitement. James watched them from across the room, remembering how it felt to be put on display for potential families who might take you home. The children were invited to the dessert table, where fancy cakes and cookies were ranged on silver plates. Most of the kids rushed forward eagerly, but one little girl hung back. She looked about 8 years old, with blonde hair that needed brushing and brown eyes that seemed too serious for someone so young. James found himself watching this quiet child. She reminded him of himself at that age. Careful, guarded, afraid to hope for too much. Her clothes were clean but old, and she held herself like someone who had learned not to expect good things. The girl finally approached the dessert table when most of the other children had moved away. She reached carefully for a chocolate chip cookie, standing on her tiptoes to reach the plate. As she stretched her sleeve rolled up slightly. James felt his breath catch in his throat. Time seemed to stop. The sounds of the party faded away. There, on the little girl's thin wrist, was a birthmark. Not just any birthmark, but the exact same crescent shape that James had carried his whole life. The same size, the same pale color, in the same spot. His hands began to shake so badly that he had to put down his glass of water. His heart pounded so hard he thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. The room felt like it was spinning, and James gripped the edge of his table to steady himself. Could it be possible? After 45 years of being completely alone, could this little girl be connected to him somehow? James stared at her birthmark, comparing it in his mind to his own. They were identical. Absolutely identical. Other guests at his table noticed that something was wrong. A woman in a red dress leaned over and asked if he was feeling all right. A man offered to get him some fresh air, but James could barely hear them. All he could see was this small girl with messy blonde hair and the birthmark that matched his own. The little girl seemed to sense someone watching her. She looked up and saw James staring at her from across the room. Her eyes met his for just a moment, and James saw something that broke his heart. The same loneliness he had carried his whole life. Quickly, The girl pulled her sleeve down too, covered her wrist and stepped behind one of the volunteers. James could see that she had learned, just like he had, to be careful around adults who paid too much attention to her. She had probably been disappointed by grown-ups before, people who promised things they did not deliver. But something about James's expression must have been different from other adults who had stared at her. Instead of fear, there was wonder in his eyes. Instead of judgment, there were tears. The little girl peeked out from behind the volunteer, curious despite her caution. James wanted to walk over to her, to ask her name, to see her birthmark again. But he was frozen in place, overwhelmed by the possibility that his life might be about to change forever. This little girl with sad brown eyes might be the family he had searched for his entire life. James lay in his king-size bed that night, staring at the ceiling of his bedroom. The clock on his nightstand showed 3 in the morning, but sleep would not come every time he closed his eyes. He saw the little girl's face and that crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist. The image was burned into his memory like a photograph he could not put away. He had learned her name was Emma Wilson. One of the volunteers had called her name when it was time for the children to leave the charity. Dinner, Emma Wilson. James repeated the name over and over in his mind, wondering if it meant something, wondering if she could really be connected to him somehow. When the sun finally rose, James was already dressed and sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Hours ago, he picked up his phone and called his lawyer, Robert Mitchell, who had helped him with business deals for 15 years. Robert, I need you to recommend the best private investigator in London. James said without even saying hello first. James, it's 7 in the morning. What's wrong? Robert sounded worried. Nothing's wrong. Everything might be right for the first time in my life. Just give me a name. 2 hours later, James sat across from Patricia Holmes, a private investigator with grey hair and kind but serious eyes. Her office was small and neat, with certificates on the wall and photos of families she had helped reunite over the years. I need to know everything about a little girl named Emma Wilson. James told her. She's about 8 years old and lives at Sunshine Children's Home. But you have to be very careful. I don't want her to know anyone is asking questions about her. She's been through enough already. Patricia studied James's face carefully. May I ask why you want this information? James rolled up his sleeve and showed her his birthmark. Then he described the identical mark he had seen on Emma's wrist. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, but she just nodded and took notes. I'll be very discreet, she promised. Give me a few days. Those few days felt like the longest of James's entire life. He could not concentrate on work, doing important business meetings. He found himself thinking about Emma instead of profit. Reports. He drove past Sunshine Children's Home every day on his way to the office, slowing down to see if he could spot Emma playing in the small yard behind the building on Wednesday. He saw her sitting alone under a tree, reading a book. On Thursday, she was helping younger children on the swings. On Friday, she was nowhere to be seen, and James worried that something had happened to her. He almost stopped his car task. But he remembered Patricia's advice to stay away until they had more information. Finally, on Monday morning, Patricia called. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I have news. James cancelled all his meetings and arrived at Patricia's office an hour early. He paced in the waiting room until she was ready to see him. Sit down, James, Patricia said gently. What I'm about to tell you will change your life. She opened a thick folder and pulled out several old documents. Emma Wilson was found as a baby outside London General Hospital 8 years ago. The same hospital where you were abandoned. James felt his heart skip a beat. The same hospital. Yes, She was left there by a young woman named Lucy Wilson, who was only 19 years old at the time. Lucy kept Emma for the first 6 years of her life, but it was very hard. Lucy worked 3 different jobs just to pay for their tiny apartment and buy food. She cleaned offices at night, worked in a grocery store during the day, and took care of an elderly woman on weekends. Patricia showed James a photograph of Lucy Wilson. She had blonde hair like Emma's and the same brown eyes. She looked tired but was smiling as she held baby Emma in arms. Lucy loved Emma very much, Patricia continued, but she had no family to help her. Her parents had died when she was young, and she had no brothers or sisters. At least, that's what she thought. James leaned forward in his chair. What do you mean? That's what she thought. Patricia pulled out another document. I found old adoption records. Lucy Wilson had an older brother who was given up for adoption when he was a baby. The records were sealed, but I have contacts who helped me trace them. James, Lucy's brother, was born at the same hospital where you were found. On the same day you were abandoned there, the room seemed to spin round James. He gripped the arms of his chair and tried to breathe normally. Are you saying that Lucy Wilson was my sister? That's exactly what I'm saying, and Emma is your niece. Patricia arranged for a DNA test to be done secretly, using a sample from Emma's medical records at the children's home. When the results came back 3 days later, they confirmed what James's heart had already known. Emma Wilson was his family, the only family he had left in the world. That night, James sat in his large, empty mansion holding the DNA test results in his shaking hands. He cried for Lucy, the sister he had never known existed, who had struggled alone to raise her daughter while he was building his fortune. He cried for Emma, who had lost her mother and been passed from one foster home to another. And he cried for himself. For all the years they could have been a family if only they had known about each other. But mostly, he cried tears of joy because he was no longer alone in the world. The next week, James put on his most casual clothes and drove to Sunshine Children's home. His hands were sweating as he knocked on the front door. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times, but his mouth still felt dry when Mrs. Patterson, the head caregiver, answered the door. Hello, I'm James Thompson, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I attended your charity dinner last week, and I was very moved by meeting the children. I would like to make regular donations to help support your work here. Mrs. Patterson was a kind woman in her 50s with graying hair and laugh lines round her eyes. She had worked at the children's home for 20 years and had seen many wealthy people come and go, some with good intentions and others just wanting to feel better about themselves. That's very generous of you, Mr. Thompson, she said, inviting him inside. Would you like to see how we use donations here? As they walked through the building, James saw children of all ages playing in common rooms, doing homework at small tables, and helping with chores. The place was clean but old, with worn furniture and toys that had been repaired many times. James's heart ached thinking about Emma growing up in this place, no matter how caring the staff might be. I was wondering, James said carefully, if I could spend some time with the children during my visits. I know what it's like to grow up without family, and I think I might be able to help in some small way. Mrs. Patterson studied his face. She had developed good instincts about people over the years, and something about James seemed genuine. We are always happy to have volunteers who truly care about our children, she said. During his first official visit, James sat nervously in the main playroom while children ran around him. Some came up to say hello. Others ignored him completely. Emma was nowhere to be seen. When he asked Mrs. Patterson about her, she pointed to a corner where Emma sat alone at a small table, drawing in a notebook. Emma is very shy with new people. Mrs. Patterson explained quietly. She's been hurt before by adults who showed interest in her and then disappeared. It takes her time to trust. James watched Emma from across the room. She had looked up when Mrs. Patterson said her name, and their eyes met for just a moment before she quickly looked back down at a drawing. James could see the same careful expression on her face that he remembered from his own childhood, the look of someone who has learned not to hope for too much for the first several visits. Emma avoided James completely. When he entered a room, she would find an excuse to leave. If he sat near her during story time, she would move to a different spot. James felt discouraged, but he remembered how long it had taken him to trust people when he was her age. One afternoon, James noticed Emma sitting alone in the corner, trying to fix a small radio that had obviously been broken for a long time. She had the back panel off and was poking at the wires inside with intense concentration. James had always been good with electronics, even as a child. That looks like a tricky problem, he said gently, sitting down near her but not too close. Emma looked up at him suspiciously. It used to play music, she said. My mom gave it to me before she died. Mrs. Patterson says it can't be fixed, but I think it just needs the right part. James felt his throat tighten at the mention of Lucy, his sister he would never meet. May I take a look? He asked. Emma hesitated for a long moment, then pushed the radio toward him. James examined it carefully and saw that one of the wires had come loose from the battery compartment. It was an easy fix. I think you're right, he told Emma. It just needs this wire connected properly. Would you like me to show you how? For the next hour, James and Emma worked on the radio together. He showed her how to identify different parts and how to use a small screwdriver safely. When they finally got it working and music filled the air, Emma's face lit up with the first real smile James had seen from her. You fixed it, she said, hugging the radio to her chest. Thank you. We fixed it together. James corrected her. You're very smart with mechanical things from that day forward. Emma began to warm up to James slowly. She would still watch him carefully when he arrived, but she no longer ran away. During his next visit, James brought a simple art kit with colored pencils, markers, and good paper. He had noticed that Emma was always drawing, but usually on scraps of paper with broken crayons. I thought you might like these, he said, offering her the art supplies. Emma's eyes grew wide. Are these really from me? They're all yours, James said. I'd love to see what you create with them. Emma spent the entire afternoon drawing with her new supplies. She drew pictures of flowers, houses, and animals. But the picture that made James's heart ache was a drawing of a woman with blonde hair holding hands with a little girl. At the bottom, in careful letters, Emma had written me and Mum. She's very beautiful, James said softly, looking at the drawing. She had the prettiest smile, Emma said, and she always smelled like the soap she used at work. She worked very hard to take care of me. James had to excuse himself and go to the bathroom to wipe away his tears. When he came back, Emma was starting a new drawing. Week after week, James continued his visits. He brought science kits and showed Emma how to do simple experiments. He brought books and read stories with her. Slowly, Emma began to trust him, enough to show him her most precious possessions, things she kept in a small box under her bed. There was a faded photograph of Lucy holding baby Emma, a teddy bear with one ear missing, and a simple bracelet made of colorful beads that Lucy had made by hand. Emma held each item carefully as she told James about her memories of her mother. Mum said I was smart enough to be anything I wanted when I grew up. Emma said one day as they worked on building a small volcano for a science project. She said I could be a scientist or an artist or even a teacher. Your mum was absolutely right, James said, his voice thick with emotion. You are one of the smartest, most creative children I've ever met. As the weeks passed, Emma began to look forward to James's visits. She would save her best drawings to show him and think of questions to ask about the science experiments they did together. For the first time since her mother's death, Emma felt like someone truly cared about her thoughts and dreams, but even as their friendship grew stronger, James struggled with when and how to tell Emma the truth about who he really was. Every time she mentioned wanting a family or asked if he thought someone might adopt her someday, James felt his heart breaking with the knowledge that he was the family she was looking for. James woke up on Saturday morning with his stomach full of butterflies. For 3 months, he had been visiting Emma at the children's home, watching her smile grow brighter each week, listening to her laugh at his silly jokes, and helping her with science projects that made her eyes sparkle with curiosity. But today felt different. Today was the day he would finally tell her the truth about who he really was. He had practiced the words in his mirror 100 times, but they still felt scary and huge in his mouth. What if Emma did not believe him? What if she thought he was lying just to trick her somehow? What if she got angry or scared? James had learned that Emma had been disappointed by adults before, foster families who had promised to love her forever and then changed their minds when things got difficult. When James arrived at Sunshine Children's home that afternoon, the sun was shining brightly and the air smelled like the roses that grew in the small garden behind the building. Emma was waiting for him in the playroom, wearing her favorite yellow dress and holding a new drawing she had made during the week. "Look, Uncle James," she said, then stopped suddenly and covered her mouth with her hands. Her cheeks turned red. "I'm sorry. No, you're not really my uncle. I just pretend sometimes that you're my family." James felt his heart break and mend at the same time. Emma had been calling him Uncle James in her mind, dreaming that he might be the family she had always wanted. Today, he would tell her that her dream was actually true. "Emma," James said softly, "would you like to take a walk with me in the garden? There's something very important I need to tell you." Emma nodded, tucking her drawing carefully into her pocket. They walked outside together, past the swings where other children were playing and toward the quiet corner where old wooden benches sat among the flower beds. The roses were blooming in shades of pink and red, and bees hummed lazily from flower to flower. They sat down on one of the benches, and James turned to face Emma. His hands were shaking slightly, and his mouth felt dry. Emma looked up at him with those big brown eyes that reminded him so much of his sister Lucy, and he could see that she sensed something important was about to happen. "Emma," James began, his voice gentle but serious, "do you remember the mark on your wrist, the one that looks like a little moon?" Emma nodded and instinctively touched her left wrist where the crescent-shaped birthmark had always been. "Mom said it made me special. She said it was like a little piece of the sky that decided to live on my arm." James smiled at that beautiful description that sounded exactly like something Lucy would say. Slowly, he rolled up the sleeve of his shirt, revealing his own wrist. The birthmark there was identical to Emma's, the same size, the same shape, the same pale color against his skin. Emma's eyes grew very wide. She stared at James's wrist, then at her own, then back at his again. "You have the same mark," she whispered. "Yes, I do," James said. "And do you know what that means?" Emma shook her head. But James could see hope beginning to flicker in her. eyes like a small candle being lit. James gently took Emma's hand and pushed up her sleeve so they could see both birthmarks side by side. We have the same mark, Emma, because we're family. Your mother Lucy was my sister. That makes me your uncle, your real uncle. For a long moment, Emma just stared at their matching birthmarks. James could almost see her mind working, trying to understand what he was telling her. Her face showed confusion and hope and fear all mixed together like colors swirling in water. "You're lying," Emma whispered. But her voice shook like she desperately wanted to believe him. James had expected this reaction. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder he had been carrying for weeks, waiting for this moment. Inside were photographs of Lucy when she was young. Official documents from the hospital where they had both been found, and the DNA test results that proved their connection. "This is your mother when she was about your age," James said, showing Emma a school photograph of Lucy with blonde hair and brown eyes, smiling at the camera. "And this is a picture of her holding you when you were a baby." Emma took the photographs with trembling hands. Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she looked at her mother's young face. "She looks like me," Emma said softly. "Yes, she does, and she looks like me too, because we were brother and sister." James showed Emma the hospital records and explained how he had been searching for his family his whole life, just like she had been hoping for a family to find her. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you save my mum?" This was the question James had been dreading most. Tears filled his own eyes as he answered. "I didn't know about either of you, Emma. I was lost too. I've been alone my whole life, just like you have been. When I was a baby, I was left at the hospital just like your mother was when she was born. We were separated before we ever knew each other existed." Emma cried then, big tears that she had been holding inside for months. James pulled her close and let her cry against his shoulder while he told her stories about everything he had learned about Lucy, how brave she was, how hard she worked 3 jobs to take care of Emma, how much she loved her daughter. "She never knew she had a brother," James explained, "and I never knew I had a sister or a beautiful niece. But now we've found each other, and we never have to be alone again." It took several more visits for Emma to fully believe and accept what James had told her. She had been hurt by adults before who made promises they could not keep, but James came to see her every single day, bringing her favorite cookies and helping her with homework and answering all her questions about their family. Slowly, Emma began to believe that maybe, just maybe, dreams really could come true. The morning of Emma's 9th birthday dawned bright and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the windows of her new bedroom. Emma woke up in her own bed for the first time as Emma Thompson. No longer Emma Wilson from the children's home. The adoption papers had been signed the day before, making official what their hearts had known for months. They were family. Emma stretched and looked round her room, still amazed that it was really hers. The walls were painted sunshine yellow, her favorite color, and covered with her own artwork in beautiful frames. Shelves lined one wall, filled with more books than she had ever owned. Art supplies that were brand new instead of shared with 20 other children, and science kits that James brought her each week. But the most special thing in the room sat on her nightstand, a photograph of her mother Lucy in a silver frame that James had given her. It was the same picture she had kept under her bed at the children's home, but now it had a place of honor where she could see her mother's smiling face every morning and every night. James had spent months transforming his big, cold mansion into a real home, where once there had been expensive paintings that no one ever looked at. Now Emma's colorful drawings covered the walls, where silence used to fill the empty rooms. Now Emma's laughter and chatter echoed through the halls. The house felt alive for the first time since James had bought it. "Good morning, birthday girl," James said, knocking gently on Emma's door. "Are you ready for your special day?" Emma jumped out of bed and ran to hug him. 6 months ago, she would have been shy about showing affection, afraid that adults might disappear if she cared too much. Now she hugged James without hesitation, secure in the knowledge that he would always be there. They spent the morning making pancakes together in the kitchen, flour getting everywhere as Emma tried to flip them in the air like James had taught her. After breakfast, they opened presents in the living room, Emma exclaiming with delight over each new art kit and science experiment. But the best gift came in the afternoon when James showed Emma the surprise he had been working on. For weeks, in the backyard, he had built a small greenhouse where Emma could grow flowers and plants, just like the ones her mother had loved. "Now you can have a garden like your mum always dreamed of having," James said, watching Emma explore every corner of the greenhouse. That evening, as James tucked Emma into bed, she looked at the photograph of her mother and asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "Do you think Mum would be happy that I'm here with you?" James sat on the edge of her bed and smoothed her blonde hair away from her face. "I think your mum would be very proud of the amazing, brave, smart daughter she raised, and I think she would be happy that we found each other and that you're safe and loved." Emma smiled and hugged her teddy bear, the same warm one she had carried from the children's home. "I miss her, but I'm not sad anymore. I know she's watching over us." James's greatest joy was not just having Emma in his life, but seeing her confidence grow every day. The shy, scared little girl from the children's home had blossomed into a happy child who laughed easily and dreamed big dreams about her future. 6 months after the adoption, James started the Lucy Wilson Foundation in honor of his sister. The foundation's mission was to help connect foster children with loving families and to provide support for single parents who were struggling to care for their children alone, just like Lucy had. The foundation's first big fundraising dinner was held at the same hotel where James had first seen Emma. As he stood at the podium looking out at the crowd of wealthy donors, James felt nervous but determined to make a difference. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, "I'd like you to meet someone very special. This is Emma Thompson, and she has something important to tell you." Emma walked up to the microphone wearing her best dress and holding her head high. She was no longer the frightened child who had hidden behind volunteers. Now she was confident and strong, ready to share her story to help other children. "My name is Emma Thompson," she said, her voice clear and steady. "1 year ago, I was living in a children's home, thinking I would never have a real family. I used to think I was all alone in the world, with no one who cared about me." The audience listened quietly as Emma continued. "But love has a way of finding us, even when we least expect it. My Uncle James found me because we have matching birthmarks. That proved we were family. Every child deserves a family, and every heart deserves a home." Many people in the audience wiped away tears as Emma spoke about second chances and the power of never giving up hope. When she finished, the entire room stood up and clapped for several minutes. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the dishes were put away, James and Emma sat together on the swing he had built in their backyard. The stars were bright overhead, and the air smelled like the roses Emma had planted in her new garden. "Uncle James," Emma said, taking his hand in her small one. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm glad we have the same mark on our wrists. It means we were always meant to find each other." James squeezed her hand gently and smiled. "The best things in life are worth waiting for, Emma, and you are worth waiting my whole life for." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had found their way home to each other. Their matching birthmarks caught the moonlight, no longer symbols of abandonment and loneliness, but marks of destiny that had brought them together at exactly the right time when they both needed family most. The end.